Hey everyone, Paul here with an ear for men. Many of you will remember back to last May when Brad Wilcox, in association with PragerU, served up a shitfest of male shame with the transparently titled video, Be a Man, Get Married. The result at this point for Wilcox's massive turd of a message is nearly 750,000 views, a more than 2-to-1 ratio of down votes over up votes, and a comment section where viewers overwhelmingly took the crap Wilcox preached and tossed it right back into his face. The video also sparked responses from the more purist MGTOW channels as well as from myself. Proving how easily Wilcox gets butthurt over people calling out all the low-end baloney he tries to dress up as fine dining, Wilcox took to the interwebs in lame defense of his ideas. All this is linked in the low bar, should you choose to subject yourself to any of it. Apparently, the avalanche of rebuke that red pill men piled on Wilcox still stings. Just a few days ago, 10 months after the initial kerfuffle, Wilcox rose to respond to MGTOWs again. Not directly, mind you, but by a proxy. One Nicholas H. Wolfinger, Ph.D., a professor in the Department of Family and Consumer Studies and an adjunct professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Utah. At an obscure website, medicalresearch.com, Wolfinger published a research brief of some cherry-picked studies supporting his original contention that marriage is good for men. What is mildly interesting about this is his stated reasons for publishing the brief, which according to medicalresearch.com was primarily motivated by, of all things, Valentine's Day. When queried by the site about his motives, Wolfinger answered with the following, and I quote, "There are two reasons. The first is what's been called the retreat from marriage, the fact that Americans will spend less of their adult lives in a marriage than they have in years gone by. Although the divorce rate is at a 35-year low, it's still high by historical standards. Also, Americans are waiting longer to get married than ever before. For these reasons, the percentage of Americans who are married at any given point in time has declined a lot in recent years. At the same time," he continued, "we shouldn't pronounce marriage to be dead and buried. The overwhelming percentage of Americans still want to get married, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 85% will do that sometime in their lives." The second reason we wrote this research brief is the rise of the Men Going Their Own Way, or MGTOW, movement. This is a group of men who have publicly renounced interest in marriage and in some cases relationships with women altogether. Some MGTOW adherents feel mistreated by women. Others feel they have to cede too much freedom if they opt for marriage. MGTOWers, his word, not mine, have reported bitter custody disputes and being unfairly deprived of access to their own children. Given their publicly strident views of marriage, they have clashed publicly with my collaborator, W. Bradford Wilcox. Our research brief is our response to MGTOW. Unquote. Okay, so at least this is pretty clear. Wilcox, and apparently now Wolfinger, are troubled by the MGTOW movement and want to assert a response. Of course, without actually talking to any MGTOW, but that's pretty typical for these types. And to be fair, I imagine there's a lot of MGTOW who wouldn't deign to speak to this pair directly either. And so the question is, what's new here that wasn't originally said in the video that MGTOW quickly rebutted, debunked, and rejected? The answer is nothing. As Wolfinger himself admits in his writing, there is nothing novel offered here, nothing fundamentally different than Wilcox already tried to sell in the original video from PragerU. Wolfinger cites research showing that married men live longer, make more money, somewhere around $16,000 annually, have better sex lives, and are generally happier than their divorced, widowed, or never married counterparts. As you dig into the research, the numbers are convincing enough. Well, until you remember that this research brief only cites studies that support the beliefs of the presenter, and were selected for that reason. Also, Wolfinger and Wilcox only lean on studies that don't account for inconvenient variables that might cause thinking people to reconsider how reliable the information is. If that sounds familiar, it should be. These are the same glaring holes and inconsistencies we see in feminist research analysis all the time, cherry-picking and ignoring data that doesn't support their ideological objectives. Playing devil's advocate to this stuff is child's play, and in fact, if my objective were to appeal to Wolfinger and Wilcox with a thoughtful rebuttal, I wouldn't even bother. Their work itself reveals they are as blind to contradictory evidence as they are to the litany of known hazards that marriage represents. They simply don't care about the truth or about the men they are trying to shame into marriage. The value in this lesson is twofold. First, it is another stark reminder that in the essence of their mentality, there is very little fundamental difference in the methods and tactics of mindless traditionalists as there is in feminists. Both camps quit using their brains and abandon their purported ethics the moment reality interferes with their agenda. And by abandoning their ethics, I mean to say they never had any real ethics to begin with. To further demonstrate this point, let's consider some other research that will help any thinking, ethical person to take Wolfinger's and Wilcox's conclusions with at least a very small grain of salt. In the low bar, I've linked you to another study, this one titled The Times They Are Changing, Marital Status and Health Differentials from 1972 to 2003. It's from the Journal of Health and Social Behavior. The authors of this study give their general assent to the idea that married people are generally healthier than unmarried people. But unlike Wolfinger and Wilcox, they pause to consider that such studies reaching this conclusion usually lump never married, divorced, and widowed people into the same category as unmarried, despite there being theoretical and empirical reasons to make distinctions between these groups. The pro-marriage studies also never considered that generally healthier people may be more prone to selection for marriage, thus skewing the results some more. And importantly, those studies failed to consider historical trends in the correlations made. For instance, from the background noted by the study's authors, I quote the following. Happiness associated with marriage seems to have waned from 1972 to 1986, suggesting that the benefits of marriage may have lessened over time. As the proportion of individuals who divorce and never marry increases, these statuses also become more normative and less stigmatized. As a result, these statuses may be less stressful and more rewarding than in the past and in relation to being married. Unquote. Now, let's take a moment to think about the implications of that. As the proportion of individuals who divorce and never marry increases, these statuses also become more normative and less stigmatized. As a result, these statuses may be less stressful and more rewarding than in the past and in relation to being married. The speculation here is clear, and it appears sound. As not being married becomes less stigmatized, not being married also becomes less stressful and more rewarding. The subtext, of course, being that it also becomes increasingly healthier to be unmarried. Following that logic, and it is logical, MGTOW and elements of the MRM are indeed making single life healthier. By rejecting the attempted shaming by the likes of Brad Wilcox, by looking past the myopic interpretation of cherry-picked, ideologically compliant research of Wolfinger, and by putting all this on public display for contemplation by rational men, we are carving out a healthier path for men everywhere who simply don't want to take the risks that Wilcox et al. Are so prone to minimize, ignore, and deny. Now, let me tell you why none of this matters. Imagine approaching a confirmed MGTOW and saying, "Tell you what, if you'll get married, I'll give you $16,000 a year." Now imagine his response. That is, his response after he either laughs in your face or throws his drink in it. After all, that is the supposition, isn't it? That a man going his own way can be bought? That for a measly $16K and the promise of more sex and perhaps even a longer life that he'll walk directly into the emotional gauntlet of marriage and be willing to risk the legal gauntlet of divorce? That somehow his hard-earned decision to forego whatever benefits to married life may actually exist are for sale for a few dollars and maybe a little pussy. Both commodities he can get without a ring on his finger. And that's the problem with these evangelically styled marriage proponents. They have reduced themselves to waving flawed research in the face of men after their attempts to use shame has proven to be a flop of monumental proportions. And it is all because they abysmally fail to respect the targets of their message or to understand what it is they are up against in the rising tide of men not willing to drink their Kool-Aid. MGTOW isn't going away. And even much, much more importantly, men who won't bother with riding internet bandwagons and still won't get married aren't going away. My message to Wilcox, Wolfinger, Prager, and the whole goddamn lot of traditional men who are stuck in a 1957 fairy tale is very, very simple. It's the risk, stupid. Men are generally cost-benefit analysts. In fact, were it not for the social pressure to stay silent on this topic, to shut up, to man up and marry someone, regardless of your better judgment, this would largely be a marriage-free society. If you believe in marriage, then start advocating for more women who aren't capricious, childish cunts primed to steal a man's assets the moment they figure out that being a capricious, childish cunt isn't appreciated. Start advocating for family law that doesn't resemble a Bernie Madoff investment scheme. Start pretending just for a moment that you aren't ideological scumbags who don't care fuck all about the men you're trying to talk to. You'd be surprised at what that may bring. If you pretend to care about the actual lived experience of actual men long enough, you might actually find yourself thinking about something other than the bullshit you seem so intent on peddling. Oh, as an aside for Wolfinger, Utah, the state you live and work in, is notorious for being a place women can go to have babies because they absolutely reject any notion of father's rights. This might be a good place to start if you're interested in making marriage more attractive. Just saying. Till then, feel free to rail on with your garbage while you watch MGTOW grow and marriage shrink. Just don't say I didn't try to tell you. And that is it for another Talk from an Ear for Men. I want to close with an invitation for you to join me in a screening of the Red Pill movie on March 7th in Washington, D.C. There's a link in the low bar. Also, I could really use your support for this work. If you're so inclined, please visit the Patreon link in the low bar and make a small pledge, or if you prefer, you can subscribe to my work or make a one-time donation via PayPal at the other provided link. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, and see you next time.